The fourth principle that we are going to talk about now is open air. We're going to find the biblical principle again in Genesis. And God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Now, it's not just that we breathe in through our nostrils, but at the same time, God placed Adam in an environment with a lot of trees, a lot of fresh air. In fact, quite different environment than the one that we can see in big cities. We're actually recording this DVD near probably the biggest city here in Australia, Sydney. No, probably, it is the biggest city here in Australia. And though when you compare the pollution here in Sydney, they have a lot of open spaces, a lot of parks in between, a lot of houses, just 1-2-story houses. When you compare this pollution with some of the pollution that you can find in other cities around the world, you can say that here in Australia, those living in Sydney are kind of like privileged to live in a city that is not so polluted as some others. Nevertheless, it was not God's plan for man to live in cities. I'm sorry to say that, but if we're looking at the concept of health, we also have to look at the concept of living in an environment where fresh air is freely available. We actually, particularly ourselves, my family, we live in an area that is not far from Sydney, but at the same time we are surrounded by eucalyptus trees and forests and green grass and hills, and you can notice it. In fact, when I go back to Europe, the moment I actually leave the plane and walk into the airport, I can already feel it. The sad thing is that once I go down to the valley, the industrial valley where my family lives, I can notice the pollution for the first 2-3 days, and afterwards I can't notice it anymore. That's sad, because that means that my body is accommodating to the situation and it's not giving me the right messages for me to realize that I'm breathing foul air rather than fresh air. Now, I remember a story that my mom used to tell me when I was little. And that was in order for her to close the windows in our bedroom. My brother and I, we used to sleep together in 2 different single beds. But my mom was summer or winter, she will just close the windows. And she will tell us, when we were very little, she will tell us that if the boys were still sleeping and the windows open by midnight, a man with a big sack will come and take the boys away. Now, I don't believe that story anymore. And the truth of the matter is that even in winter, we should at least have a little bit of the window open, because you don't want to be breathing the same air that is lacking oxygen all through the night. You will get up in the morning and will appear to you that you haven't rested enough. You haven't been refreshed through the night's sleep. Even in winter, you should at least have a little bit of the window open to have that continuous fresh air coming into the room. Now, let's go to look at an aerobic cell. Now, you have aerobic cells in your body. You also have anaerobic cells in your body. What's the difference between them both? Well, the aerobic cell is actually produces energy through the adding up of glucose plus oxygen. So we have glucose and oxygen as the fuel, and then that produces energy and a leftover, a leftover to disregard in a way, CO2. Now, the anaerobic cell, it doesn't have any oxygen. It only has glucose. So it reacts and produces energy, and it produces also the leftover called lactic acid. Then later on, that lactic acid can be reused to another anaerobic cell and be used as part of the fuel, and so on and so forth. Now, why am I explaining this to you? The thing is that you have anaerobic cells or aerobic cells depending only to you. Your body can have more anaerobic cells if you are the kind of person that doesn't know how to breathe properly, doesn't know how to exercise properly, and has a lifestyle that is depriving your body of oxygen. But if you have a lifestyle that is increasing the circulation of your blood, that you breathe in fresh air, that you're eating the right stuff, and you're not walking around with sadness and heaviness of heart that deprives your body of oxygen, you're actually improving the number of aerobic cells in your body. Will that make a difference? Will aerobic cells make a difference if your numbers are higher on those? Well, I'll tell you why. The aerobic process generates 18 times more energy than the anaerobic process. 18 times more energy. You walk around in your workplace and ask people. Everybody is tired. Everybody doesn't have the push, doesn't have energy to move forward, doesn't have the strength. They're always tired. It seems like they go home, they're tired, they get up in the morning, they're tired, they're always tired. How many anaerobic cells they have in comparison with aerobic cells? Probably more of the former than the latter. The anaerobic cells are rampant in those bodies, and though they create an energy level, it's actually 18 times less than in God's plan. In God's plan, God wants our bodies to be renewed as with eagle wings, and to actually run and walk and not be weary. That's His plan. In order to do that, we need to be able to introduce also oxygen into our body and be able to transport that oxygen into every single part of our body. We do that, as we said before, through exercise, but also the biggest channel for that oxygen to get into our body is through our nostrils. The Bible said that God breathed into Adam's nostrils and gave him and he became a living soul. Now, you want to become a living soul? You need to breathe properly through your nostrils. Now, you need to take into account a number of things. Your posture. Now, in order to breathe properly, we need to breathe with what we call diaphragmatic breathing. It is a breathing that is through the expanding of the diaphragm. Now, if I were to ask one of you to actually come here and ask you to show me a deep breathing example, most of the people will do like this. They'll be so happy about themselves. They'll think that they just got it all together and they put a lot of air and oxygen inside the bodies. The reality is that they didn't. The deeper breathing is the diaphragmatic breathing, a breathing that I don't need to lift up my shoulders. What I need to do is I need to work on my diaphragm. And my diaphragm, I'm going to show it graphically. My diaphragm is just a matter of filling up my stomach like a balloon. If you have any questions, if you have any doubts, if the explanation hasn't been clear enough, just go to a friend or your sister or a family or any other family member that recently just had a baby. And go near that baby while the baby is sleeping and pay attention to God's plan for breathing. How is it that we have changed from diaphragmatic breathing to shoulder breathing? Two major issues. And I'm going to start with a funny one. Ego. Ego is one major cause of poor breathing technique. While I was going through university, I was going through the library, and it was this man. This man just went for a session in the gym. He had the singlet on, fairly tight to the body. You could see the six-pack there. And this young man was talking to a beautiful girl there. And of course, you can imagine how this young man pump up muscles after he left the session in the gym, was talking to this young girl. He was like this, showing off. He was talking to her, and he was showing off. Now, I was at that time making a study on breathing, and I was fascinated. I actually sat down, I was looking at this boy, and I was looking at the diaphragm. That diaphragm wouldn't move. You know why? Because if the diaphragm moves, what happens with the six-pack when you have a shirt or a singlet that is fairly tight to your body? It destroys the six-pack. It just destroys it. You know, it's like all of a sudden it appears that you're pregnant, you're not pregnant. You're pregnant, you're not pregnant. Right? That doesn't look good. Ego caused that boy to actually breathe completely incorrect, in an incorrect manner. The other thing also is we go with our wives to buy a new pair of jeans. And we always have used jeans that are 34 to 36. And we go after the Christmas season, because in January the prices are lower. So we go and decide to go to the shops with our wives to buy a new pair of jeans. We always wear 34 to 36 jeans, and we go there, and of course it's after Christmas, so the 34, 36 don't fit in. But wife is outside, and you are going to check with her if those jeans were all right to buy, and you're already realizing that those jeans are not going to fit. But you are her man. You go outside, you put the stomach in as much as you can, and you go, dear, good as always, as young as before, as strong as ever. And you're suffering of oxygen deprivation because of ego. The other thing is actually posture. We live in a culture that is training potato posture. We have what we call the lazy boys. The lazy boys are these kind of sofas, individual sofas, that we lie down on them and we watch television. By the way, if you don't believe in hypnosis, we have a hypnosis machine in the house. Pretty much everybody has one. Some people actually in 2 or 3 bedrooms. It's called TV. But the couch potato posture does not allow proper breathing. We are not used to actually walk with our shoulders pointing backwards, straight, and controlling our breathing through the diaphragm. Our belts or our clothing are too close to our bodies, and it does not allow proper diaphragmatic breathing, because it's tight, because fashion, because that's the way we like it. Whatever the reason, clothing can be used for health, clothing can be used for sickness. And in case of breathing, much of today's clothing is so tight to the skin that does not allow proper breathing and proper assimilation of oxygen in the body. So nasal breathing is another thing to consider when you go walking. Of course, in some circumstances, you will have to breathe through your mouth. But God has actually placed this little thing here. In my case, my children say that I've got a nose like a potato. This little potato here for proper breathing. Actually, it gives the nice humidity to the air. It actually acts like a filter and regulates the temperature of the air, so when the air gets into the body, has a much comfortable temperature for the body to assimilate rather than too cold or too hot. On the contrary, when we're breathing through the mouth, we don't have the same benefits. We don't have the filter benefits, we don't have the humidifying benefits, and we don't have the temperature regulation benefits. So, though at times it is necessary to breathe through your mouth, it is of much benefit to actually learn to breathe through your nostrils with the proper posture. And the third point we've got here is fresh air. We mentioned before, it's called negative ions. How many here heard that? Negative ions. Negative ions, you don't find those ones in Sydney. You don't find those ones in New York. You don't find those ones in London. In fact, they don't belong there. Those are city ions or positive ions. The negative ions, you find it near the coast where the waves are breaking, or up in the mountains or in the countryside. Again, that's God's plan for human beings, to dwell in environments that are pleasing for the eye and healthy for the body. And the fourth point that we want to point out here in terms of the oxygen assimilation is lifestyle. Stress will chew up your oxygen level. You might be breathing through your nostrils, have the right posture, and living in the country. But if you are going through a stress, that will deprive your body for properly assimilating the oxygen levels that the body requires in order to become a healthy body and full of energy body. The effect of negatively charged fresh air, or the negative ions. I'm going to list to you some of the benefits of breathing the air from the Garden of Eden, or from country living, if you want to call it that way. Improved sense of well-being. Increases rate and quality of growth in plants and animals. Improved function of the lungs' protective cilia. Decreases anxiety, lowers body temperature, lowered resting heart rate. Decreased survival of bacteria and viruses in the air. Improved learning in mammals. Are we mammals? Well, fresh air, negative ion air, increases our learning. Decreases severity of stomach ulcers. All that by the free, fresh air that God has provided to His people.